If I die tomorrow, at least people will know that's my version of what happened.
On October 16th, 1991, a gunman entered Luby's Cafe in Killeen, Texas, where he opened fire, killing 23 people and injuring 27 more.
And all of a sudden, this truck came barreling through the front floor-to-ceiling window, and then we heard gunshots. Remember, back in 1991, these things weren't happening back then like they are now with the frequency. So it just simply wasn't the first thing that comes to mind that this guy was just going to walk from one person to the next and execute them. He said they saw, it was pandemonium at that point, bodies everywhere. And they said they saw a woman on the floor, on her knees, cradling what was clearly a mortally wounded man. And they said they saw this 30-something-year-old young man walk up to her. They said she looked up at him. He put a gun to her head, she put her head down, and he pulled the trigger. But that was my mom. And, it didn't occur to me as I was running. She and my dad had been married 47 years. They had just had their 47th wedding anniversary, and she wasn't going anywhere with that. See people wanting to enact gun control, I take it much more personally now. As it comes around the room, as he levels his weapon on your 2-year-old grandson's forehead, even if you've chosen not to have a gun at that point, don't you hope the guy behind you has one and knows how to use it?
How you guys doing? I want to thank you for tuning in to our very first episode of The Voice of Reason with me, Rob Young. I'm your host. On today's episode, we have Dr. Suzanna Hupp. She's a Texas native. She's a wife. She's a mother, doctor of chiropractic medicine, former state representative for the great state of Texas. And let me say, my family's from Texas, so I got a lot of love for your state. These are just a few titles that we can use to describe you. You've done some incredible things over the years, and I just want to say thank you to begin with for being my very first guest on my show. I'm
excited. Thank you.
I'm excited too. And so for our viewers, Suzanna and I share some things in common in regards to surviving 2 horrific mass shootings. Both incidents carved out groundwork for gun control legislation, not only in our states, but in our country. However, Suzanna and I believe, we both don't necessarily subscribe to what most people would think that we do when it comes to the Second Amendment and the importance of people being able to protect themselves, not only in their everyday lives, but in times where they may find themselves in a situation like ours. So many of you already know my story, but you may or may not know hers. So I'd like to turn it over to you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to note that I didn't grow up in a house with guns, but I did grow up in a house where my father was an expert on the founding of the country. And so I was steeped in understanding of what the Second Amendment was for. At that time in the state of Texas, we didn't have concealed carry. You could carry a gun in your car under certain circumstances. So this was back in 1991. Golly, that's a long time ago, isn't it? It was in October, and my parents and I were going to a local cafeteria, middle of the day, going to have lunch with a friend of mine that was managing the cafeteria that day. Beautiful day. In fact, it was Boss's Day, and it was the day after payday, so the place was packed. Um, we ate. We ate lunch with my friend that was the manager, Mark, and we were finishing up and just kind of piddling around a little bit. He got up and went into the kitchen to check on things. And all of a sudden, this truck came barreling through the front floor to ceiling window. It was clearly an accident. He knocked over a number of tables as the pickup truck came barreling into the restaurant, and it came to rest fully in the restaurant, so a good 15 feet in. And I remember I started to get up and go help the people they had knocked over because tables went flying, chairs went flying, people went flying, and you're convinced it's an accident. And then we heard gunshots. My father and I immediately got down on the floor and put the table up in front of us. We had our backs to a window and wall. Um, I can remember thinking, kind of peeking up over the top of the table, and I remember thinking, all right, he's going to say something like, everybody put your wallets up on the table. I mentioned that it was Boss's Day and the day after payday, so you figure that's what it is. And remember, back in 1991, these things weren't happening back then like they are now with the frequency. So it just simply wasn't the first thing that comes to mind that this guy was just going to walk from one person to the next and execute them. I certainly didn't.
The term active shooter really wasn't a term back then.
That's correct. And so we heard the gunshots. He was on the other side of the truck from me, so I couldn't really see what he was doing. And then I remember also thinking that maybe it was a hit. Maybe there was somebody important in there, right? And I remember seeing him walk around the front of his truck, and I clearly remember seeing him take aim at somebody on the floor and pull the trigger. And then he went to the next person and took aim and pulled the trigger. And that was when I suddenly realized, oh my God, this guy is just here to execute people. And he was maybe 15 feet from me at that point, and I thought, I got him. I got him. Realized my dad and I are down, got a table up in front of us, mom is down behind us, and I reached for my purse that was on the floor next to me because I always carried a gun with me. And as I mentioned, at that time in the state of Texas, it was illegal, but I had been convinced by numerous people, including an assistant DA in the Houston area, to carry. So I reached for my purse and realized that about 3 months earlier, I had made what was clearly the stupidest decision of my life. I had begun leaving the gun out in my car. Because like most normal people, I mean, you figure, what are the odds, right? If I needed a gun, it was going to be if my car breaks down on a back road. It's not going to be in the middle of the day in a crowded restaurant, at least not back then. So when I realized the gun was out in my car, I remember thinking, well, great, what do I do now? Throw my purse at him? I looked at salt shakers. I looked at you. You can't go up against a guy with a gun with a salt shaker or your butter knife. That doesn't work. So, and I've had people ask what I think are kind of stupid questions. They say, well, do you think you could have pulled the trigger? And I think to myself, my God, what kind of person wouldn't have pulled the trigger? And I'm not an expert shot by any stretch of the imagination, but I've hit much smaller targets at much greater distances. Everybody in the restaurant was down. He was up. Like I said, he was maybe 15 feet from me. Um, when I realized I didn't have that gun, though, my attention turned to my father next to me, and he kept raising up and kept saying, "I've got to do something. I've got to do something. He's going to kill everybody in here." And I remember grabbing him by the shirt collar and trying to hold him down and saying, you can't get up, you can't get up. And I said some choice words to him. I remember a curse word being in there. But when he saw what he thought was a chance, he broke loose from me and went at the guy. But the guy had complete control over the circumstances. Again, he was up, everybody in the restaurant was down. He had total control. And when he saw my dad coming, he just simply turned and shot him in the chest. And my dad went down in the aisle, maybe 7, 8 feet from me. Um, and as horrid as this may sound, I saw the wound and I basically wrote him off at that point. The good news was that it made the gunman change directions. Instead of coming directly toward me and my mom, he had to go around my dad. And so he stepped off to my left. And he continued around the room. And I remember that was the first time I got a good look at the guy. And he was about my age at that time, early 30s. And he was a decent looking guy. And he had this new truck. And I'm thinking, my God, what could possibly be so wrong in this guy's life? The dumb things that go through your mind. I remember thinking, I would date this guy. What is wrong with him? And right about that point, somebody at the other end of the restaurant, the back of the restaurant, managed to break through one of those floor to ceiling windows, and I saw people getting out that way. We were kind of up in a corner where we were essentially trapped. When I saw people getting out that way, I peeked up over the top of the table, and when the guy's back was to me, I stood up and I grabbed my mother by the shirt collar. I said, come on, we got to run. We got to get out of here. And my feet grew wings, man. I flew out that back broken window. I actually ran into my manager friend, came out a side door, and he said, "Oh my God, thank God you're okay." And I said, "Yeah, but Dad's been hit and it's bad." And I turned to say something to my mom and realized she hadn't followed me out. So, long story short, everybody was going across the street to an apartment complex. I was one of the last people out of the restaurant, um, and people over in the apartment complex were already calling 911. As it turns out, the cops were one building away in a hotel. They were in a little mini clinic, and in an odd twist of gun control fate, the manager of the hotel had asked them to leave their firearms. They were plainclothesmen, and she asked them to leave their firearms in their cars because she didn't want to offend any of the patrons. So they told me later that they wasted precious minutes while they had to retrieve their guns from the trunks of their cars. They got over there, and by the way, a couple of these guys were patients of mine, so they gave me all the lowdown of this. They said that they got over there, they didn't know who the gunman was until they kind of worked their way in behind his pickup truck. And they said they saw it was pandemonium at that point. They bodies everywhere. And they said they saw a woman on the floor on her knees cradling what was clearly a mortally wounded man. And they said they saw this 30-something-year-old young man walk up to her. They said she looked up at him. He put a gun to her head. She put her head down and he pulled the trigger. They said that's how they knew who the bad guy was. And all they had to do was fire a shot into the ceiling, and this guy rabbited to a back bathroom alcove area, exchanged some gunfire with them, and then put a bullet in his own head. But that was my mom. And it didn't occur to me as I was running. Um, she and my dad had been married 47 years. They had just had their 47th wedding anniversary, and she wasn't going anywhere without him. So 23 people were killed that day, and I was angry. And as you can tell when I talk about it, I still get pretty angry if I think about it. I'm angry at myself. I'm angry that I chose to obey an incredibly stupid law. And I wasn't the only one. There were other people in there with their guns out in their cars, and I learned a valuable lesson that day.
It's seconds matter. Seconds matter. Yeah, there's a lot of
The cops did the best they could.
there's a lot of lessons, to be had there. I've been in law enforcement, listening to your story, I'm thinking as a cop. I've been in law enforcement for 19 years. I currently serve as a sergeant for my agency. I've been in officer-involved shootings, having gone through what I went through as a child, at a school shooting where, I lost several of my friends. I was shot twice, in that one. You realize when they say seconds matter. And you said something, that stuck out. It was like all we had to do was put a round in the ceiling to make him coward, and I've seen, studying these shootings for years now, these guys are absolute cowards. They're going after areas that are vulnerable. They're going into a restaurant, and like you said, at that time, it was illegal for people to carry, concealed weapons, and we've had a long history of making it very, very hard for people to lawfully carry a firearm. And and the only thing, the conclusion that I came to is the only thing that's going to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. There's no laws that he didn't care about the laws. He has nothing to lose at that point. And I would venture to say he went into that restaurant knowing that he was going to end it somehow, right? He was going to take as many people out with him.
Yes, he was just as many of them are, they're just very angry people and want to cause as much pain and want to rack up as high a body bag count as they possibly can.
Well, I am so sorry that you had to go through that, and I've read up, on your story a little bit, and I purposefully didn't. I wanted to get some basic details, and I've actually heard you speak before, but I hearing it in detail, hearing you share it with me today and with our viewers today, man, I get choked up a little, because I know that fear, and I'm sorry that you had
Yeah.
to go through that. And I know that you lost, two very close people, your parents, that
Yeah.
day, and I'm so sorry. And I know that anger too that you're going through,
Yes.
But I commend you for sharing your story. So how long?
Well, thank you. I've got to say thank you for doing what you do, because when you're talking about children, there were no children in our situation, and that's kind of a whole different ball of wax. That's a whole different level of evil.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, the calls and the stories that I still struggle with to this day, involving my career, have been the ones involving children. And I'm a dad. I have 4 kids of my own, and school age children, and yeah, I mean, I hear of all these school shootings and stuff going on, and every one of them, man, it cuts deep. It really does. It cuts
Hmm.
deep. But I've always, I've done several interviews over 30 years, 30 plus years now. It's different for me to being on this side, being the interviewer, and
I'm glad you're doing it.
yeah, no, I'm glad I'm doing this too, and I'm glad that you're my first guest.
Thank you.
This is it's an honor, to talk with you. So wow, how long from start to finish? How long did this incident take?
Um, about 15 minutes. Um, I can tell you that, people said, "Oh no, it wasn't that long," but I can tell you that, as I mentioned, I was one of the last, if not the last person over to the apartment complex across the street. I was able to walk upstairs into somebody's apartment. I got cut up in the glass, and so I was bleeding, and so people had their windows open. Everybody was milling about, talking, and you could still hear gunshots. Um, I was able to go upstairs, clean my elbow, clean where I was bleeding, and I was able to make 2 phone calls. One of them was to my clinic and to tell him what was going on, and the other one was to my brother. But I got his voicemail, and my sister-in-law told me, you could still hear the gunshots in the background. And then I was able to walk back downstairs and go to where the police had set up a perimeter. And one of the cops right there was a patient of mine, and he was waving me back because they weren't sure that the scene was secure yet. So, I mean, you put all that together, and I think it's about 15 minutes.
And that's an eternity. That is an
It
absolute
it really
eternity.
is.
Seconds, when I say, again, seconds matter. When you're in a situation like that, guys and gals, I mean, when you're feeling helpless, and a 30-second incident, it feels like it lasts an hour. I can't imagine 15 minutes. My shooting was over in about 3 minutes, and 30 people were injured, 5 kids were killed, and the gunman was dead as the cops were getting on scene. And you mentioned the cops being next door. I think about that because I've had people, say, "Hey, we want to invite the police department over to this meeting, and would you mind not carrying your guns?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not. Like we're I don't go anywhere without this thing."
It's like, yes, yes, I would mind.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what's not going to happen. And so, man, and I feel like we go in waves in society, where people, they demonize firearms, and they, oh, it's scary, and the cops are scary, and we're kind of going through that now. So I'm kind of relating, to you talking,
Yeah.
and what that request was, and I can see that happening now, even with all these shootings going on. It's just like I don't get
You
people's
know,
thinking.
Rob, I think a lot of it is women, and I hate to say it, but we don't like things that are loud, and that we don't like killing Bambi, generally speaking. I'm generalizing hugely here. But we are the softer sex. Um, yeah, I think it's fair to say most women I know don't like chainsaws, you know, but they
But they like
recognize
firewood.
chainsaws as a tool. Exactly. They recognize that chainsaw as a tool that can help that can, as long as it's in somebody else's hands, you know. The firearm thing, I think, especially with all these school shootings, there's just an overwhelming need to, and you and I have both heard this a million times, to do something. And I hate that phrase because it scares me to death, because do something means, well, we're probably not going to do anything that's worthwhile, and we're going to take your rights away, but we'll at least have done something, right? Um, it's that need to do something, and they don't know what else to do. Now, I think we are starting to formulate some ideas now of other avenues, but I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these people, they come out of good intentions,
Yeah,
just with no real experience, and dealing with legislators for many years, and no offense, a lot of these people,
sorry.
yeah, a lot of these people come in, and they're writing laws on things that they don't understand. We
Right.
years back, I was part of the whole gunmageddon in California, and where the governor at the time, and it was Jerry Brown, and a lot of the legislators, Kevin DeLeon was, this is a ghost gun, and I was there during a lot of those hearings, and he had no idea what he was talking about. And he and I actually exchanged words in the halls at the state capitol. I was like, because I testified in those hearings, and he, guys like him, they're writing laws, and they're introducing these bills, and they have no experience on what they're writing. And that's my biggest problem with some of these
Hmm.
lawmakers, and they're, and not even just lawmakers, just people basing their opinions off emotion.
And it's fed by the media. I can tell you that, well, I don't know how many times in my life I've had a reporter say something about, well, surely you don't think people should have semi-automatic weapons. And I have to stop them and say, wait a minute, what do you think a semi-automatic weapon is? And of course, what they think it is a machine gun. And these are reporters. These are the people that are educating the rest of the populace. And and some of these people are very well educated people. I my son had a friend, an attorney friend in California, and she was saying that on Facebook. Well, to my son, Ethan, surely you don't think people should. I'm not trying to take your guns, but surely you don't think people should have semi-automatics. And so I had to chime in and say, I think there's a problem here. And I explained to her the difference. And I said, so if you want semi automatic guns gone, you are, in fact, wanting to take my guns. And every other woman that I know that carries, because they all carry semi automatic.
Right. Yeah, they throw out the terms. We talk about AR-15s and AK-47s. It's a weapon of mass destruction, and it's military
Yeah.
weapons. And like, no, it's not. No, it's not.
Yeah.
I tell people I can go out and buy a Toyota Camry. It doesn't mean I can get into NASCAR and race it. I'm not going to do very well. Even though they're driving Camrys and Ford Fusions. And so,
Yeah.
yeah. Again, it's that lack of knowledge, and really the whole purpose of me starting the Voice of Reason podcast. I want to bring on some people and actually have this grown up conversation with some folks, and let's talk about this. Let's talk about the misinformation that's rolling out there with a lot of these media groups and these terms that have been introduced, and these, yeah, like you said, semi-automatics, that this mindset that's a machine gun. I hear people talking
Hmm.
about it's a fully semi-automatic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's think
I've
about
heard
that.
that
Let's
too. It's like, wait,
dissect
what?
that term real quick. And so I've taken,
They don't know.
yeah, and I'm quick to bite my lip because I get it. I do get it. And you said,
But it is frustrating.
it's very frustrating, and I laugh, and they're like, "Wow, you think this is funny?" I said, "No, the incident we're talking about isn't funny, and I'll never laugh at somebody getting hurt, but I laugh
No.
at your lack of knowledge and you thinking that you know what you're talking about, because
Hmm.
sometimes you need to have some thick skin and put some people in in their place too, and stand up and say, no, this isn't right. And I've had the opportunity over years to take people to the range and let them shoot AR-15s and Glocks and different type of firearms, and get them over that fear. And they've changed their tune real fast, and I think,
It does.
yeah, I'm trying not to get offended real fast.
Well, but I would encourage you to, anytime you give an interview, um, I mean, you're doing the interview, but if you're giving the interview, and that whole silly semi-automatic thing comes up, ask them what they think it is, and I promise you, yeah, they think it's a machine gun. And they think that AR-15s, well, no one needs an AR-15, and it's like, you realize they're not even as powerful as that 9 millimeter handgun right there, and of course they don't know that.
It's a glorified 22. It really is, and I mean,
But they don't know that.
yeah, it's
It's
no more,
ugly.
it's no
It's an
more
ugly gun.
deadly than, yeah, it's no more deadly than any other gun. Yeah, so let's talk about this. So you spent 10 years in legislature.
12, yes, yeah,
How did that come
3 minutes.
about? How did you get involved in that, if you don't mind me asking?
No, so when the incident happened, in speaking with my brother and sister and in-laws, we realized that, the reporters have to report. And if you're not willing to speak to them, then it's hard to be mad at them for saying the wrong things. So we opted to go ahead and talk to the press. And I think they were all a little shocked when I didn't blame the gun, that I made the comment, I think the day after the incident. I said I was angry at my legislators because I felt they had legislated me out of the right to protect myself and my family. And I was angry. I was angry at myself. I told you that. I was really angry at myself. But having said that, they quoted me on that. And I think it surprised a lot of people that I felt that way. And, that I didn't immediately call for gun control. And so over the next few years, people started asking me to run for office. In the state of Texas, it doesn't pay. And I wasn't in a financial position to walk away from my chiropractic clinic and do it. I mean, it pays, but it's like 7,000 a year. So it's, and they say it's a part-time job, but it's not. It's full-time. Anyway, so I think people started asking me because they hoped I felt as strongly about the rest of our rights as I did about the Second Amendment, which I do. I told you I was raised with that stuff. So when we got to a place where I felt like I could do it financially, I did, and mostly enjoyed it, sort of.
Mostly enjoyed it. Yeah. And
It's not for the faint of heart, and you got to have a thick skin for sure.
so how long after this incident did you get into office?
The incident was October of 91, and I entered office in November of 96.
All right.
Yeah.
And so I guess how much time did you really focus as a lawmaker, on gun rights?
Well, that's an interesting question because I actually went in and I did file bills, but I wanted to be careful because it was very easy for somebody to tag me as a one issue candidate. So what I ended up doing was having several bills drawn up, and but then giving them to other legislators and helping them. So I would join author the bills, but I wouldn't be the lead author for that very reason. So now, having said that, there were a handful over the years that I said, no, this one's mine. For instance, um, they, the cities, the municipalities wanted the right to be able to say, okay, you've got concealed carry now, but you can't have it in our town. So it was called the preemption bill. And so I passed that and said, no, this is a state law. You can carry it in any city, any municipality, any county in the state. So some things like that.
Good for you. Wow.
I actually tried to pass. Back then we called it Vermont style carry.
Vermont
Now
has
now of course
they have some very open gun laws there. you know?
Now it's called constitutional carry, but I tried to pass. I say I tried to pass. I filed and asked for a hearing for Vermont style carry back in early 2000s, knowing that it wasn't going to pass, but I wanted to begin educating some of the legislators, that this does exist somewhere. And if they were against it, I could say, well, are you somehow insinuating that your constituents are inherently more violent or untrustworthy than the people of Vermont? So it was fun. It was fun. And you start the process. Some things take a while.
Yeah, good for you. No, seriously, I commend you for, you said
Thank
it.
you.
People need to get involved, and they feel like they need to get involved, and you got involved, and at probably the detriment to your own business and, your family
Oh yeah.
life. And I can only imagine. I've spent some time in the halls at the Capitol, and I spent a few days out in D.C. Working with Gun Owners of America several years back.
Great group.
Yeah, Eric Pratt. I love that guy.
Yeah.
And his dad
Yeah.
and Larry, and
Yeah.
great folks that I still keep in contact with. I went out there after Sandy Hook and got to share my story on Capitol Hill, and that opened my eyes big time. To really how this whole process works, and spent some time with Gun Owners of California and working with Sam Preparedness and testifying at Senate committee hearings there in California, and man, it's frustrating sometimes, but getting
You know,
getting interrupted at minute and 53 seconds just so they could tell me that I had a 2-minute window, and then not letting me finish because time was up, and I'm like, you interrupted me and I had 2 more sentences, let me talk. But yeah.
it's um it is eye-opening for people. I do encourage people to get involved. And I encourage voters to realize that nobody gets to be dictator. I was one of 150 representatives, and then we have 31 senators. They nobody lets you be dictator. Everything is a compromise. I mean, for Pete's sake, the founding of our country was a compromise. So you have to work for little victories, sometimes big victories. And I always think of it as just continuously moving the bar in the right direction.
Yeah. So I had some questions that I wrote down, and it's general questions, and I don't want to repeat ourselves or anything, but obviously this incident cost you and your family dearly. Again, my condolences.
Yes.
So sorry you had to endure any of that. But how would you say this incident changed you and your way of thinking towards modern day gun control? And you answered it a little bit, but let's dive into that a little bit. How would you say it really changed your mindset?
Again, having been raised in a household that understood the Second Amendment, even though we didn't really have guns in the house, we weren't hunters. Um, it obviously drove the concept home in a very personal way. And now it's no, it's a shame because you kind of touched on this earlier. It would be nice if everybody made their decisions based on logic. They don't. Newsflash, they don't. So I think it's really important to have stories like yours and stories like mine, people that have stories like that are willing to share them, because the other side automatically looks for the victims that want to just outlaw guns. So I think it's really important that people like us speak up and say, no, it's not the guns. It's not the guns are a tool. They're a hunk of metal. They're a tool that can be used to kill a family, or a tool that can be used to protect a family. So I guess the short answer to your question is, when I see people wanting to enact gun control, I take it much more personally now.
Yeah, I do too. I share that. Yeah, and it's funny is a lot of people that have been in our shoes really do share that, and it's the outside people that are really, you know, um, introducing these things and screaming out, we need to ban guns, and instead of
Yes.
focusing on what we really need to focus on, and how about we start enforcing the laws that we have on the books even better, and I know, like, here in my state, man, we're having a lot of issues, with fighting crime and keeping criminals behind bars and people that stray away
Yeah.
from the laws that are meant to protect people, but then they go after, doctors and lawyers and, blue collar workers for, having an AR-15 that doesn't have a bullet button or some fin grip or something on it, here in our state, and putting these guys away. But yet we let these gangsters out that have been arrested 15 times, and because we need to shrink down the population in the prisons here. And it's like, wow, what are we doing? Is it really that important?
There's no logic there at all. None.
It's not, and that's what we have to fix. And again, that's what I've dedicated my life to, is just getting the education out there and talking with everybody that will talk to me, so I can hopefully inspire that thought and inspire that real change, the real change that needs to happen, right? So again, another question. So many people who survive shootings, or so many people that survived the shooting where I was injured, have chosen not to talk about it. Many have joined the Brady campaigns and other groups in order to try to ban certain weapon platforms. I believe this is how they chose to cope. If I may ask you, what did or what does your healing process look like?
Um, like I said, I think for me, the dominant emotion was and still is anger. Anger at the legislators, as I mentioned, because I felt like that it was their laws that kept me from being able to protect myself and my family. Anger at myself for having chosen to um, follow a bad law. Because let's face it, if you need a gun, it's generally because your life is in danger, right? Um, I ask me the question again. I think I got kind of sidetracked on that.
Like, for me, talking about the shooting a lot over the years has really helped me, and not holding it in and reaching out to people.
Oh yes.
Like, that was part of my healing process. And I have so many people that survived the Cleveland elementary school shooting that won't talk about it to this day, and I had a friend who was severely wounded in that incident and took several surgeries, and we were in first grade at the time when it happened, and his last surgery was our junior year in high school. And to this day,
Wow.
he doesn't like talking about it. He's kind of reclusive about it. The principal at our school that day, I still keep in touch with her, and I love her dearly. She's an amazing woman, has a huge heart, but she's done maybe one interview, in 30 plus years. And she just doesn't like talking about it, But for me, talking about it, doing the interviews, sharing my story as much as I can.
It's cathartic.
It is, and it's kind of released that pressure valve. So yeah, I guess my question to you is, what was it that got you to this point and helped keep you going? Was it sharing it? Was it counseling? Was it?
No, I for me, I was fortunate because I had good friends and family, and so the professional counseling for me wasn't. I never felt a need for it, only because I was fortunate and I had plenty of counselors. They just weren't professionals. You know what I mean? Um, I do think, like you said, that is a pressure release valve. Being able to talk about it, because I think you and I have both made a difference. You and I will never know how much difference we make, because that ripple effect, I mean, goes so far out, we'll never know. But I think that hope and that desire that you are making some sort of difference helps m- make you feel like okay, there was a reason. There's a reason I survived, right? Um, I'll tell you, for me too, I had so many people for years asking me to write a book. And I'm not Ernest Hemingway, you know, but I finally sat down after I stepped out of the legislature. I finally sat down and wrote a book. And that shocked me how hard that was, Rob. I can tell you that really surprised me because, talking about it, you're not going into the same detail that you do if you ever sit down and write about it. You're trying to flesh out all the details that you can recall. And that was emotionally a lot harder than I expected it to be. I mean, yeah, it was a lot. It was really hard. And it didn't leave me feeling good at the end of the day. But I'll tell you this, I'm thrilled to death that it's done. It's out there. It's been out there now for pushing 10 years. And if I die tomorrow, at least people will know that's my version of what happened. So, they can misquote me, and you know how that is. There's misquotes all over the internet, but at least that my version is out there in my words. So that was
That
cathartic.
encourages me because my wife, who's sitting in the room, she's listening in on this, and she's been getting on me for a couple years and just saying, "Hey, you need to get this book done, and you need to write it." And I have started it, and I have pages. It's not very much, but it's emotional. I didn't realize how it was going to make me feel. And I sit there, and I remember the last time I sat, it's been a few weeks now, but I sat and, I don't have a lot of downtime. We have 4 kids, right? And jobs and everything else and chores and
Right.
finding free time, it's hard. But the last time I sat down to write, I was exhausted after.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this is hard. This is a lot harder than I could have ever imagined. And I've talked about
Yes.
my story for years,
It's different. When you talk about your story, I suspect you're like me in that when I tell my story, I'm not reliving it. I'm just telling the story. I'm not reliving it. But when you can sit down to write it, like I said, there you're having to go into detail and you're kind of reliving it.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. Yeah, one of the, I'm a believer. I have my faith that has gotten me through. And, I like to share a scripture, and it's a life verse that I carry, and it's Romans 8:28. And it says, all things work together for the good, for those who love God and those who are called according to his purpose. And, the way I read that scripture, it says, all things work together for the good. It doesn't say all things are good, right? And that's life,
Yeah.
And I like to think that you and I and people that have been through similar situations that are out there making a difference have went through something very horrible that we're able to use to relate to people, and really connect with others. And, again, I commend you for everything you've done and continue to do, because you went through a very horrific thing that there was some good that came of that too, and I know it paved the way for you professionally. It paved the way for you to reach out and maybe change some people's thoughts that maybe
Hope, right?
right, we can hope. And like you said, you'll never know, right? You'll never know the true value in that. So, good on you.
Rob, I can tell you that, I get sick of doing this kind of stuff. My apologies. But what keeps me doing it is that every so often, some stranger will come up to me and say, hey, let me tell you a story. I heard your testimony. I saw it on YouTube, and I didn't used to carry, and that made me start carrying. And this is what happened. They'll launch into a story, and you find out that, by golly, sometimes it does make a difference. Or the fact that the law was changed. You made a difference in somebody's life, and I'm sure there are stories out there for you as well. You'll never hear. So they're out.
And maybe that person, stops another mass shooting, and
Yeah, you don't know.
who's to say, right? If it saves one life, it's all worth it. Yeah, that's what I say. If it saves one person, it's worth it, So let's see. What advice would you give to someone who also may have gone through something traumatic, like gun violence? How do you typically respond to the survivors who blame the gun? again? I think we're kind of maybe repeating just a little bit, but how do you typically respond?
You know,
Because I'm wanting to give our viewers, some tools. Maybe somebody who relates to us, relates to you and your story, and they're like, how do I respond to these folks? And I'm just trying to give them some tools and some insight, really.
well, at the risk of my repeating myself, what I said before still stands. I tell them a gun it's a tool. If it's a woman in particular, I tell them I get it. I get it. I'm not crazy about guns. I don't like guns. I have no love for guns. To me, it's a hunk of metal, and it's a hunk of metal that, yes, it can be used to kill a family, but it can also be used to protect a family. And what I tell them, and in fact, when I've testified many times, I've tried to in the end, I try to find a couple of people in the committee that have grandchildren or are likely to have grandchildren. And I say, now imagine when you leave here, you and your friends, you go out and you're going to go have lunch at the local cafeteria down the road, and you're just going to and your grandkids are coming over. They're going to meet you, and you haven't seen them in a few days, and how wonderful is that? And I kind of take them through the process of trying to mentally put them in that place, and then I say, now imagine this guy coming in, and again, you got to drag the story out a little bit. I won't do that here, but imagine this guy coming in, and he starts shooting. And I say, as it comes around the room, as he levels his weapon on your 2-year-old grandson's forehead, even if you've chosen not to have a gun at that point, don't you hope the guy behind you has one and knows how to use it? And I'll generally stop my testimony there and let them think about it.
I've done similar things in some hearings that I've got to share and conferences and stuff that I spoke at, and I'll sit there, and I tell my story, and it's pretty compelling. And, I say, my incident was done in 3 minutes. And then I talk about the average police response times in America, and the average 911 call and the average response time is around, 4 minutes, right? Well, what can happen in 4 minutes? And then I'll start the timer, and I'll just do 1 minute, and I'll start clapping, and I'll clap. Every time I clap, it's a gunshot, right? That's your granddaughter. Wow. That's your neighbor. That's the person sitting next to you. And I'll clap again. And you see the emotion. I've had people in my audiences that have actually started crying. Their lip starts quivering.
Yeah, that is powerful.
And I said, this is 30 seconds, and let's think about this. So you want to rely on the police, and by all means, let us do our job once we get on scene, but you may need to hold the fort down until we get there, right? And a lot can happen. When they say, we have school resource officers. Let's talk about school shootings. We have school resource officers on a campus. Okay, well, I've worked on a campus in the Bay Area that was 64 and a half acres, and I was the only SRO that was on campus. What if the gunman comes in at corner X and I'm at corner C, and I have to hoof it on foot, right, with my pistol, my sidearm,
Or what if he knows who you are and takes you out first? God forbid. That's what I would do. If I were looking to rack up that body bag count. God forbid, but
yeah, and there's no absolutes. There's no, I did a podcast, with a friend of mine, several weeks back. We talked about there's no absolutes in these. When they ask me, what do you think is a solution? Right. Well, yeah, we need to make guns more available. There are several people, who work in our school systems who are teachers or, like in your incident, a cook or, anybody, a janitor, who has experience with firearms, whether it's the military or law enforcement, or they grew up as, a hunter or just grew up on a farm.
I want my teachers to be able to protect themselves. Yeah.
They need to.
Yes.
They are. I tell a story all the time. A friend of mine that, retired as a sergeant with our local sheriff's office 28 years, and then was an investigator with the DA's office for 5 years, and then went over to the school district PD for a few years as a sergeant, and got out of law enforcement, 30 plus year career, and he went into public schools as a substitute teacher, and he couldn't carry his gun. But yet
It's
six
stupid.
six
It's
months
just
before that,
stupid.
he was expected to when somebody called
Yes.
911. This is the same person, you know. So yeah, I'm not saying, you know, get a teaching credential or, you know, here's a Glock and go teach our kids, but there's plenty of people that can do it, you know. And
Well,
hopefully they're
and
there, you know, when stuff
right.
happens, you know.
And we're not expecting, well, so my sister was a teacher up until she retired in December. Couldn't wait to get out. Um, and she was a brilliant teacher, but what I would always ask is, why is it that she can carry a gun and we trust her as a state? We trust her across the street in the Walmart where there are women pushing baby carriages around. There's, 100 people in there, little kids everywhere. We 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 trust her there. But for some reason, the minute she crosses the street and goes into her school, all of a sudden now we don't trust her. There isn't any logic to that, and we all know that these guys that do this sort of thing, they go to places where guns aren't allowed. I mean, that's just such a no-brainer.
Wow, yeah. Um, and you guys have had your share of shootings there in Texas. I know you're not too far
Oh
from
my
Uvalde.
God.
You're right near Fort Hood. Yeah, I mean, these things happen, right? And I think they're going to continue to happen. You know, we did a study,
They are.
that active killers, it's been going on since the 1700s. There's documented cases, not with firearms, but with swords and rocks.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
there was attacks on children and, for hundreds of years, and we're never going to be able to legislate evil out of existence. It's a reality that we all need to come
I
into
agree.
conclusion with. And so, I say to myself, how much more important is it for us to train and be ready and be equipped? And like you said, it's a hunk of metal. When we talk about firearms, and guns aren't necessarily the answer either. I carry a gun, not because I want to play super cop, but I want to be able to protect my family, and it's a tool.
Yeah.
The gun,
And it's not a guarantee. It's, let's face it, if somebody wanted to come in and kill their estranged wife and the person sitting next to you, if I happen to be the person sitting next to them, I mean, I'm done. It's over.
what
But
gun law is going to stop a criminal? I mean, really, like, the criminals don't care about our laws anyway, right? So really,
right,
if we
right,
pass the strictest gun control measures, is it going to make guns disappear? No, it's not.
of course
It's
not.
not. So, let's get away with all that foolishness and let's move on and say, okay, then what do we need to do? We need to equip our people.
Mm.
We need to make it
Yes,
easier for our folks to receive training. And I'm adamant about, if you're going to carry a gun, you better know how to use it, right? Because you're responsible for every bullet that comes out of that. You need to know
yeah,
your backdrop. You own every bullet coming out of your gun. And if you don't know how to operate it, and I see it all the time, even with cops, that the only time they ever shoot their gun is when they qualify once a year. Well, that's
yeah,
not
yeah.
enough. If you're carrying a firearm, you need to be training. You need to be at the range regularly. It's an investment that can save your life or somebody else's, and stopping the threat when the time calls for it. you know
Yes.
so what do you what does your life look like nowadays? What are you up to?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm working for the Texas Attorney General as a special executive advisor, and I play a lot with my Arabian horses. And I do some book signing and that sort of thing. I will tell you this: my husband is a forensic psychologist, and he has been saying for years that there are things that we can do to catch some of these guys before they actually do their dirty deeds. He said, you're not going to catch all of them, but he said, I think we could easily prevent 80 to 90%. And so, because most of these people have left signs, you'll hear the stories of, well, yeah, yeah, or they'll send them to the school counselor and they get a risk assessment, a little 15-minute check off the box thing. Those are worthless. Um, but if they are flagged, you can pull in a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Or it has to be at the very least a master's level that's capable of doing what's called a threat assessment. That's different than a risk assessment. It takes a couple of hours. And those, he's absolutely convinced you would catch 80 to 90% of those guys before they do it. And you could then go in and have them adjudicated in a way that you could take their guns. That's different than these red flag laws where anybody can say, oh, he scared me. That's a whole different deal. I don't agree with those at all. But this would be step by step. And yes, exactly. And there should be a process when you're talking about stripping somebody of their constitutional rights.
Absolutely. I hear that all the time. People ask me, Rob, do you think that everybody should be able to carry a gun? No, not everybody. There's people that have proven themselves to be a danger to society.
If they can vote, then they should be able to carry.
I agree. Yeah. Absolutely. It's interesting. And maybe I'll get your husband on the podcast. I'd love to pick his brain and hear his thoughts on this.
You could probably do that.
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
Yeah, we're working on revamping. We're probably going to revamp my book and have a second part, and he's looking at writing one. There are ways of doing it, and we could make a difference.
Yeah, the name of your book is...
My book is called it's a long title, I'm sorry. It's From Luby's to the Legislature, One Woman's Fight Against Gun Control. If you type in From Luby's to the Legislature, and we're actually getting ready to do another reprinting of it. We're kind of in the process of determining, do we do that or do we revise it now? So there's some still out there.
Is it on Amazon?
I think you can still get it on Amazon. To be honest with you, we've sold about 10,000 copies. And we're literally almost at the end of how many were printed, according to the publisher. So we're making some determinations on that now. But I'd be happy to send you a copy if you'd like.
I'd love to. Absolutely. And I definitely want to exchange, contact information with you and stay in touch, and if there's anything I can ever do for you, let me know. And, I'm encouraged just by talking with you and feel a lot more motivated too, to get back in finishing my book and just keep doing this stuff, and because again, you've been given a voice, I've been given a voice, and I think it's a shame when people keep that to themselves, right? I don't know it all, but I have a story to tell. You have a story to tell. And, I'm a constant student. I like to, learn and stay open to different viewpoints. And, so yeah, I'm all ears, but, well, this is not the end for you and I, and I appreciate you. And again, I'm looking forward to getting to know you more, and, hopefully I make it out to Texas to see some family, and I would love to meet you in person. And, thank you again for coming on, my podcast and being my number one. You're my number one guest. So we're hopefully going to...
Rob, thank you. In all seriousness, thank you for what you're doing, because you don't know who you're going to reach out there and what kind of a difference that might make. You're never going to know. Maybe when we die and we're sitting in judgment, then maybe we'll find out then, but we'll never know. So you're doing the right thing, and that's what's important.
Any last closing remarks that you would have for our viewers?
I would say again that a gun is not a guarantee, but it changes the odds.
All right. I think we're going to wrap it up. And again, thank you.
You.
All right.